I'm joined on the line this morning by Dr. Mziwandile Ndlovu. He is a Research and Policy Analyst at the African Institute for Development Policy. He was a contributor of a recent book publication entitled Democracy and Africanness. This book was published by Springer, and a copy of it can be accessed on the link that I'm going to paste right in the description panel for this video. Dr. Mziwandile, thank you so much for making the time.
Anotida, thank you so much for having me on your platform. Pleasure.
That is wonderful. I was looking forward to this. I had the opportunity to read the entire book and particularly your chapter. Now, because we are running a series on elections in Zimbabwe, I was very much interested to have you to give a talk, particularly about your chapter. So now I do have a lot of questions for you, but I would want you to start this conversation and discussion by just briefly describing what you consider to be the core ideas of your book chapter and its central argument.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. The main thrust of the chapter really, as you can see, that it starts by saying norm entrepreneurs or norm takers. It's really taken from some theoretical arguments from scholars such as Akaria and Finemo, which really have viewed mostly African contributors to democratic discourse as not really making much of a contribution, rather as just norm takers rather than norm entrepreneurs. So when we come particularly to the enterprise of election observation, it is mostly Western actors, Western election observer missions that have been viewed as the innovators, as the entrepreneurs of the democratic norms and values, whereas the African actors have really been viewed as merely just the norm takers. What the chapter actually does is that it tries to elevate the contributions of the African actors, particularly the African election observer missions, because of a view that their significant contributions have not really been looked at from a positive view. They have really been looked down upon. Whereas the truth of the matter is that so much has been done by African election observer missions, a lot of work that has gone unheralded. So it actually tries to move African actors, African election observer missions from being mere norm takers to being norm entrepreneurs on the same footing as Western election observer missions.
So now, based on the findings of your research, does the election law make provision for observers? And are they allowed into polling stations and counting centers?
Right. So I'm going to be answering this question, both from the findings of the chapter and also from my experience in working on issues of elections in Zimbabwe, particularly with the Zimbabwe Election Support Network.
Wonderful.
So certainly, Section 239 of the Zimbabwe Constitution does make provision for the work of election observer missions to do their work. So there is actually a number of documents that really actually spell out what happens, the way that they are brought into the country. Certainly, on paper, the work of election observer missions is provided for. They are also provided for in as far as having access to the polling stations is concerned. Actually, I can add that it's not only the polling stations. The observers, they observe as much of the election process as possible, the other processes also including the election campaigns, even the candidate selection processes, the internal ones for the political parties, as well as some other processes such as voter registration. But while it is like that on paper, the truth on the ground is that in some instances, there are some, barriers that election observers face. If I were just to give, one example, there's a time when I was working with the Zimbabwe Election Support Network in 2012, where I and a number of observer colleagues were, barred from accessing a certain primary school in the Midlands, where election registration was taking place by some partisan ZANU-PF functionaries who had simply gone there to have a look at how the process was going, and we were told that we were not known in the communities, and that they were only allowing people that were known to get into the primary school and to do the registration. So on that particular occasion, we had to leave, also for fear of our safety. So yes, we can say that to a certain extent, the observers are allowed into the polling stations, but there are certain instances of the elections that some observers are not able to access, for such as some of them being election registration, and also some of the campaigns or the candidate selection processes of certain political parties, particularly ZANU-PF.
Do observers have clear rights under law to receive copies of official documents and election result protocols and to collect other information?
There are certain things that observers do have access to. Some of them are provided for in the first schedule of the Electoral Act, such as gaining access to the polling stations, and also some of the things that observers that they are not allowed to do. For example, they are not allowed to hinder or obstruct the work of electoral officers, or also to do anything that is viewed as politically partisan. So some of the things, for example, the observers, they are entitled to observe all the processes that happens, and you'll know that on some of the documents, the returns documents, it could be the V11s or the other return documents in other centers such as the constituency collation centers. So it's not only the candidates and their polling agents that sign, but the observers also sign, as a way of building confidence in how the electoral process would have gone. So I would say that they do have, copies or access to some of the documents, though my view is that some of the other stakeholders have more of a claim on some of the documents, such as the candidates, as well as their polling agents, because they are the actual players in the process. But if you read the law, it's not really clearly spelled out to say that the observers themselves are entitled to those documents. But in practice, I've seen observers being, allowed really to access many of them, and their signatures are actually also required on some of the returned documents.
Mm-hmm. That is wonderful. So that is actually evidence that to some degree they do have some form of access to these documents. I'm asking this particularly because whenever we get reports on the news or anything that the election was not free and fair, or that the election was rigged, we always wonder, we always wonder that if we have election observers, then what kind of work are they doing and what kind of access do they have that can, provide credibility and integrity to the election? But now this gets me to the other question that I have for you, that how does the accreditation process work? I understand that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission does provide accreditation to the various election observers that come to do their work or to observe the election in the country. How does that process work? How do they get accreditation, and what does ZEC look into in order to give that approval?
Right. So usually the first step is that ZEC actually does open a process for applications from the observers, and the observers themselves, both local and international, do need to apply. But I need to tell you that ZEC is not the only player or the only role player in this platform. They are also, players from the government. I do know that the Minister of Justice does play a role. I do know that also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also does play a role, especially when the applications have been made and the process of vetting. And you will know also that there was a 16-year period starting, around 2001, 2002, when election observer missions, particularly from Europe and the US, were not being invited until a time that during the 2018 elections, the Mnangagwa administration changed that policy and started to invite them back, mostly as part of their re-engagement strategy. So it's not only ZEC really that has a say in how this happens. The government of the day also does have, a role to play. But some of the administration processes really that do happen is that when these applications have been received, usually the mission is informed. They are also asked, about issues to do about the size of the mission. And then, a time is set aside for, the actual observers to actually go to the offices of ZEC. It could be, at the main center or at the provincial centers to actually, do get accredited and have, the accreditation badges made out for them. So yeah, it's a process that has ZEC playing a role and some government officials playing a role. So it actually does have its political connotation.
Now, given that they do get the accreditation and they come to carry out their work in the country, are sufficient personnel usually available for the observation? And do they have the necessary expertise or the resources to carry out an objective observation?
Right. So the book chapter does go some length really in trying to unpack those issues. The truth of the matter is that to a large extent, the missions do not have, as much personnel as they would want to. Mostly because they do not have as much resources as they would like to. The various classes of the observer missions. So for the local ones, the Zimbabwe Election Support Network usually is the one that deploys the largest mission. And every effort is made to try and have, observers at all the polling stations, collation centers, etc. But it's very difficult, really, to ensure that all the polling stations are covered, particularly those in the most remote areas. And the situation becomes actually even worse for the foreign missions because they just arrive on the eve of the election, and some of them are very small. They just divide themselves to go to a few centers to just view a few of the processes. So the answer is a resounding no. In most cases, it's rare that observer missions have the amount of personnel that they want. Then also coming to the issue of the expertise that is required for the missions, there's been a general improvement in as far as the personnel is concerned. Particularly amongst the African missions. There was a time, for example, when some of them were, just populated by politicians, Perhaps it would be just members of parliament coming from other African countries. But over the last couple of years, we have seen, a better infusion of election experts actually coming into the fold. You have media experts coming in. You have, legal experts coming in to observe different aspects of the elections. Then you actually have some, specialized missions, such as SADC, ESN, that is actually, populated by personnel from other election management bodies from the region that are actually coming in to try and, observe in a way that also improves the operations of ZEC. Then you have actual others, such as others are actually, judicial missions that actually bring judges that are actually coming to look in detail at the legal aspects of the elections. So my feeling is that there's been an improvement in the infusion of experts and expertise in the African missions.
So do these people have security? What's their security situation when they come to carry out their election observation? I'm asking this because, sometimes we get reports that there was violence in certain constituencies and certain areas. How safe are they when they carry out their work?
That the process actually does have, some political involvement. So depending on the government of the day, especially if the government really wants to portray a certain image to the international election observer missions that are coming into the countries, they may actually make, particular, special arrangements to ensure the safety of the observers, just so as to give that impression. But I'll also go back to the incident that I've already talked about, where myself and certain observer colleagues were not able to access a particular primary school where registration was actually happening. So we had to leave that center actually also because of fears of our safety. The surprising thing is that actually there was a uniformed police officer at that primary school. And the incident actually happened right outside the school gates. Two gentlemen, clearly, dressed in ZANU-PF regalia, approached us as soon as they saw us parking our vehicle. They approached us, they asked us who we are, what we're doing. And we had already been accredited, and we had those, giant ZEC beeps, clearly showing who we were. But, these commissars said that we are not from the community, we don't know who you are, what are you doing here? And, from where we're standing, we could actually see the uniformed police officer. He could clearly see what was happening, just outside the gate, but he did not make any kind of intervention. And so when we really felt that our safety was compromised, we just drove away. So, as local observers, I would say that from that experience, the safety of observers is not always guaranteed. And I know also of other instances where observers who wanted to observe the primary elections of ZANU-PF in particular settings were also turned away to say, if you are coming from an organization such as ZESNI, you are viewed as regime change people. You are not welcome here. You cannot view, you cannot participate or observe the internal primary elections.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm afraid we are running out of time, but thank you so much for making the time to give this interview. Viewers and listeners, this was Dr. Mziwandile Ndlovu. He is a research and policy analyst at the African Institute for Development Policy. He was a contributor of a recent book publication entitled Democracy and Africanness. This book was published by Springer and a copy of it can be accessed on the link that I'm going to paste right in the description panel on the upload for this video and in the comment sections on our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Thank you so much, Dr. Mziwandile.
Thank you very much, Arno. Thank you for having me.
That is wonderful. Have a good day.
Thank you.